Culture, Nutrition, Health. My name is Lucinda Manda, and I won't introduce myself much further. I'll introduce myself last, along with my co-facilitator, Sylvie. Since there are a few people in the group in this room right now, I thought it would be nice to know who you are, where you're from, and what interested you in signing up for this session. So could we start with the ladies on my right?
Good afternoon. I'm Nirmala from ANH, an NGO working in several states of the country. And we're looking at maternal. We started with maternal newborn health, and we moved on to nutrition of mothers and young children. Right now, we're also looking at including this approach, the community approach, to look at livelihood activities. And I thought something that you could talk about, ethics of research in nutrition is really very useful to us.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm also from ANH. My name is Bhavna, and I also work on the agriculture and nutrition connection. I'm Sandeep from the National Institute of Nutrition, Hyderabad. I'm a scientist working in the area of food safety and focuses on mycotoxins. And I'm particularly interested in this because we are looking at some studies which involve the association of mycotoxin exposure to child with undernutrition. So, what kind of ethics really go into when you're collecting data or when you're collecting samples? Because there's a lot of research ethics involved. I was particularly interested in seeing what goes on with this.
Hi, I'm Durga Prasad. I work with IMP Global, and I am actually working as a manager on a project which is known as We Collaborate for Nutrition. It's a knowledge platform wherein we focus on collating knowledge and dissemination through various sources. The prime area of my work is in one of the states in Jharkhand. I'm working with the state government in improving the supply chain for micronutrient supplementation. And in Rajasthan, it's basically on the SBCC strategy for improving maternal and child nutrition. The third area of work basically which I'm looking at is the ag nutrition in Odisha. So we are working with a partner who is basically working in the tribal areas to promote agriculture and nutrition. And we are supporting them in their process dock and bringing the knowledge together so that it can be disseminated at large level. So that's the idea.
I'm Elizabeth Kirkwood from University of Sydney. I work as part of the maternal and child nutrition team. We mainly work with implementing partners in South Asia. And I'm also a PhD student, and I'm looking at some of the women's empowerment impacts of a particular project we have in Bangladesh. Well, we do work in ag nutrition. We have had some NASA funded projects, and I'm interested in seeing a little bit more about that.
Hi, I'm Claire Custodio. I'm from the International Rice Research Institute, IRI, based in the Philippines. So we are expanding our research from rice to food systems approach and going also towards nutrition. So I'm interested to learn about the ethics aspect if we go to that direction.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Suresh. I'm a PhD student. I'm from National Institute of Nutrition. I'm presently working on nutrition and its interactions with the type 2 diabetes. So we are working majorly on the rat models, the Vista rats. Presently I'm here as an organizer.
Hi, my name is Sanjeev, and I am in Digital Green. Digital Green is a international organization, and we are based in Delhi. So we are involved in agriculture and health nutrition related research. Especially, we are evaluating some of our interventions on health nutrition and agriculture. So here we want to just brush up our understanding of research ethics.
Hello, I am I work with Digital Green as a mini manager, and most of my work involves doing data analysis, data extraction, and helping the decision making at senior level as well as reporting to the program team. So I just wanted to learn about the research ethics also. So what kind of rules and regulations and kind of protocols required while we are collecting the data and doing that search, so that it would add more value to us.
I am Tirupati Reddy. I am working as a PhD scholar in National Institute of Nutrition, and my topic is my specialization is biostatistics, and presently I am working under big data analytics in nutrition. How it will be useful, and how they can use the tools which are advanced methods in nutrition and in statistics also.
Hello everyone, my name is Abel. I work as a research team in agriculture at University.
My name is Sylvia Alonso. I'm one of the facilitators for this learning lab. I work for the International Livestock Research Institute based in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia, and I'm also the chair of the ethics committee of that institute.
And finally, again, my name is Lucinda Amanda Taylor. I'm facilitating with Sylvia. Who am I? I'm a mother and a wife as well, 2 children. Where do I come from? University of Malawi, College of Medicine, so a country that's sandwiched between Mozambique, Tanzania, and oh gosh, my geography sounds terrible, but those are the 2 of the countries that we border right now that I know it's factual. What do I do? In my former life, for 7 years, I was the IRB administrator for our ethics committee at the College of Medicine. So I have real hands-on experience with some of the ethical questions and issues you might have when we come to the question and to the question session. And right now I'm a senior lecturer in bioethics at the same university. Why am I here? Well, the previous speaker about Abel and Joe contacted couldn't be here, so I was asked to step in a long time ago. So I'm really privileged and happy to be able to give you this lecture. What I want you to know to begin with is I'm not going to be able to give you agricultural and nutrition specific examples. What the aim of this lecture was is to give you broad strokes on what I would like to share with you some of the ethical principles and key approaches to the ethical conduct of research. And I think that whether just because they're not specific to the disciplines or the areas that you're in, because ethics is cross-cutting and broad, you'll be able to take the notions and the concepts that I offer today and the practical sessions that we will offer today, and take them back to talk about what is the right thing to do. And we may not be aware that at the time we're actually doing ethics. So ethics sometimes, or ethics in the most part, is not something that we are formally trained in doing, but we happen to acquire the knowledge as we pass through life. So we know what expectations we have in terms of doing what is right, good, and also understanding what is bad. So despite that, there is a branch of ethics that then helps instruct us on how to make decisions, and that's called normative ethics. And so as a discipline, it requires us to understand what actions are good, bad, beneficial, and what actions are responsible or harmful. And in the field of normative ethics, you often find ethical principles and approaches for ethics-oriented research. And I use the word signposts deliberately because when we understand the principles and approaches, we're able to use them as signposts in our research when we're trying to do ethical research, when we're trying to conduct ethical research. So I think essentially the message I was trying to convey there is that intuitively we should be able to know how to do what is good or bad, right and wrong, and what would be a bad way to do research. So what are the objectives of this session? I'm going to take you through what is traditionally taught and explained in many research ethics course, a quick and easy exploration of the historical context of research ethics, because I think the discourse that is presented lays a good foundation for us understanding why we have the certain guidelines we have for the ethical conduct of research. And then I'm going to discuss with you what I believe are some of the basic ethical principles which are used and applied in research. So they set the standard for a researcher to be able to evaluate what kind of research is good in what particular context and what would be bad. So essentially giving you the tools, the ethical tools for good decision making in research. Just a quick slide that I found here, a picture that I've used in the past. You know, what can we learn about ethics from the past? Well, what this picture depicts here is that the history of politics and medicine and business is thick and rich. We've had scores and scores of books written about the subject, but the history of research ethics is brief and thin. And I use that quite loosely, really, but in the context of trying to explain to you that the guidelines that have arisen in the last 40 years or so would have been, they're fairly recent compared to the books that we have on history. So when we understand research ethics, usually our timeline starts from the Nazi war crimes. So that's about 1940. So it's fairly recent. But in terms of medical research without the guidelines, we do have, for instance, the first principle articulated by Hippocrates, which was the Hippocratic Code, and that led a lot of research, that led a lot of doctors and practitioners in health to understand what their role was in medicine and in treating patients. So the Hippocratic Oath really says, I will prescribe regimens for the good of my patients according to my ability and judgment, and never do harm to anyone. So I think the critical aspect here that sought to guide doctors in the medical field was to never do harm, and that principle really has extended itself, and we see it in the genesis of the documents, because that's when the question of why these guidelines arise is essentially breaking that kind of fundamental principle of doing harm. So the first key document that we really have in the field of research ethics is known as the Nuremberg Code. And I'm sure a lot of you have come across that. I don't need to go into much detail. Who's come across the Nuremberg Code? Yeah. Most of you, right? Yeah. So I don't need to go through that. 1947. And what are the key essential features within the Nuremberg Code? After the atrocities that were committed, it's recognized that one of the key things that needs to come out, particularly when you're doing research, is to get voluntary consent from the participants. And another key thing out of 16 precepts in that document is benefits of any research must outweigh the risks. And again, the ability of the subject or the participant must have the ability to withdraw from participation. The next document that is often cited when we're talking about research ethics is the Declaration of Helsinki, formed by doctors for doctors to guide them under the World Medical Association. So in 1964, it becomes a guiding document for doctors in biomedical research involving human participants. And one of the seminal things that also comes out from the document that's clearly and explicitly expressed is the need for written informed consent, because the Nuremberg code just talks about voluntary consent. This is the document that really articulates the need for written informed consent. It also is one of the first guiding documents that requires researchers to, medical doctors, to have their research peer-reviewed, okay, before they can conduct their research. So among colleagues, they should be able to make an assessment of whether this research is permissible. And a primary precept as well in the Declaration of Helsinki is that the concerns for the interests of the participant must always prevail over the interests of science and society. So we see where, as we are moving on in history, we're adding on certain other key features that make it a good reflecting point for research as requirements for the ethical conduct of research. So there's a kind of growth and development, as well as further growth is experienced when the Belmont report is released in 1979, and I'm sure we're also all familiar with what happened there. And that's when we really get from the US government clear guidance and burgeoning of the establishment of IRBs after the atrocities committed on poor black sharecroppers when they are recruited into research study for syphilis. So one of the things that emerged from there was real guidance that there must be an ethics committee that peer reviews, an independent ethics committee that reviews the science and the ethics of the research. And then the next one that I, thought I'd talk through would be, apart from these, what we would understand as probably Western guiding documents, there's a development of CIOMS, Council for International Organizations in Medical Sciences, 1986, but it's been revised in 2002, and there's been further research revision. And that ethical guiding document really was developed, draws heavily from these other documents, but was developed to be applicable for research in the developing context. Okay, so trying to address the needs of fair benefit sharing in research. So for instance, if a pharmaceutical company comes into a country and tests a particular drug, and that drug is discovered to be efficacious, what are the kinds of arrangements that could be made that could be extended to the population that has given itself up for research? So from these documents, we learn that, human experimentation can be traced back to several centuries, and all of us in the room seem to be involved in some kind of research that involves interaction with human beings. Atrocities in human subject experimentation, of course, set up the basis for these landmark statements and these guiding documents, and contained within them will be essential principles. But another key feature is that the research, the interests of science, must never trump the interests of society. Written informed consent is paramount. And we also learn about the principle of justice in research. Because from the examples of the atrocities that were committed, we find that they're usually recruiting vulnerable people. And so if you're going to do research, and you're going to do research that's good, and you're going to do it well, require that there's a fair treatment of human participants and human subjects in research. And another important critical feature was that all research that is conducted in any context, in any setting, in any country, must be approved by an ethics committee. Ethics committees play a dual role, and this is still a debate in literature whether they should just focus on the ethics and leave out the science. But I believe a good ethics committee will combine both, because you can do good science but have bad ethics. And again, we learn about the principle of justice, and for a researcher, the critical thing to remember here is that every time you're going to do research, you must consider the risk and balance it against the benefits. So in the slides to follow, we'll be talking about some of the key principles that I think are important, and as well as sharing with you some that are from literature that I've read. So there are numerous principles that have been enumerated that provide guidance for research. The seminal one, I'm sure you've probably come across this, has been published by Childress and Buchan. They talk about the principles of biomedical ethics, and in there they outline or highlight three important principles: respect for persons, beneficence, and justice. And these are also contained in the Belmont report. And then there is another author that I also like to draw on. He's called Ezekiel Emmanuel, and he has an article that was actually produced out of a workshop that was held in Malawi. I think it was in 2007, that he calls the benchmarks for clinical trial research in developing countries. And he, in that seminal piece of work, outlines about 8 ethical principles. And some of them include collaboration as well as assessing social value. So I'd urge you, if you are interested, to look that article up, because it really does provide a great background for a researcher to assess how they can apply these principles and what's the right thing to do when doing research. So while there are lots of ethical requirements, they can and do vary across countries, the principles still remain the same. So just to reiterate, we talked about the 3 principles, and we'll be going into them in detail. But I just wanted to outline to you that oftentimes you'll find that beneficence is sometimes written with non-maleficence, right? So you'll see in other literature there's respect for persons, and you'll find beneficence stroke non-maleficence, and then you'll have justice. Really, non-maleficence is like a corollary to beneficence, okay? Or complementary to beneficence. So it requires a researcher to do no harm, to maximize potential benefits while minimizing risk. So if you see that in literature, just know that it's the corollary of description. So, first principle, respect for human beings, or respect for persons. Really, when I talk about this in my classes back at home, I usually to the undergraduate students will bring it back to kind of getting them to understand why this is important. And it's based on the recognition that each human being has obviously intrinsic value, right? It stems from what you may have read about Immanuel Kant's philosophy, right? And why does he say that people have intrinsic value? Well, it stems from the idea that we have life, yeah, and each life is valuable, and so an individual's life should not be violated. And so he extends the argument to talk about individuals exercising autonomy, being independent people who are able to make independent life choices, decisions, and so because they are able to make their own decisions in life, we should afford them or accord them the necessary respect. And so often you find that principle as well becomes the foundation of informed consent. That's really where you apply the principle of respect for persons when you are obtaining informed consent. But also when conducting research, respect for human beings, respect for persons is applied when we're thinking about the context in which we're going to work. Most of you in this room probably visit other cultures or visit other countries and conduct research in other countries. Extending the principle of respect in this aspect would require that you understand the local values, the local customs, the culture, before you are able to navigate your way and enter into a community that you're going to research. One example I often give to my students is that, even in Malawi, there's a divide between the urban and the rural. And as a social scientist and as a researcher, I don't go into the field with my jewelry, with my dress above my knees. I will recognize and respect the local customs and will dress modestly and put on a chitenje, something that is a cultural cloth over me, so that I'm able to show them that, one, that I'm one of them, but also I respect their way of life, their modesty. The second principle is beneficence. And this is really applied when we're talking about understanding the value of the research. Okay? We're not going to conduct research for the sake of conducting research. And if you read the article that I pointed out earlier, the Ziki Manual, it talks about every research must have some kind of social value. What are the benefits, not only for you as a scientist or a researcher, but what are the benefits that the participants or the communities are going to derive from participating in this research? So the research must be of value to participants, their community, or their country. And as well, we find most of us work in a context where research agendas have already been defined. Okay? So in my country, we'll have the National Health Research Agenda, and that document clearly stipulates what types of research is or are a priority. Okay, I can't come and do a research that doesn't really fit into the meeting the health needs of the population. So I think most of us work within that context. Also, research must be designed to minimize risks. And I think we highlighted that already. And in the health and development context, research should carry a commitment to support empowerment and participation, which is, again, very, very key. And I think that sometimes as researchers, we do this poorly. What do I mean by that? I think that research, for any researcher, for any good researcher, there's a need to engage the community before, during, and after the study. Okay? And oftentimes what we do is we get the funding and we move to get the ethics approval and we move for recruitment. And we haven't done any kind of prior knowledge of the community or even found out from the community what their needs are, or even gotten community permission way before the study is actually initiated. So engaging and talking to the community, talking to gatekeepers is actually very useful for a researcher, because then you find out how to properly embed your research for the benefit of the community. And so as scientists, definitely, if we're going to do research and we're going to do research well, we should understand that we have a fiduciary responsibility to our stakeholders and members of the community to conduct engagement activities. Third principle I want to yes, sorry.
Can I ask a question? I think you make a verified point of talking to the community well before the study is initiated. What is that at what time of the project initiation should be, because they have a responsibility to not bother them if you can't do anything without the funding or the clearance from high bodies, because we probably are not even allowed to bother them, right? So what is that window around which you suggest we talk to the communities about what they need? How do you do that?
That's a very good point, and I'll say it from like the perspective of health research, and I think you can apply it. Usually, if you're going to have a good protocol, a good proposal, you would include engagement activities beforehand, And what, like in the health field, if you're going to come in with a new intervention, say to test HIV microbicide or something like that, it is encouraged that you at least gain community knowledge about the possible acceptabilities, maybe the barriers, and find ways through the dialogue you have with the community, ways in which you might be able to engage with them to make your study process acceptable when you get the funding. Does that make any sense? Yeah.
So would that be
So that's one way.
formative research and feasibility studies and things like that?
You could do that, or you could, if you are established at a trial site, you have community engagement, community advisory groups or community advisory boards, who are people in the local community that are able to represent the community interests and bring to you some of the concerns that you may meet. So things that are important for a researcher to know in terms of what would be the barriers for entry into the community. Yeah. The third point would be, a researcher should be looking to minimize harm in the study design. Minimize harm in the study design. And so the next few slides will be looking at that. We understand that as researchers, we don't intentionally go out to harm participants, but at the same time, we should be mindful of some of the research that we could do that could potentially have some type of implication, some harm could arise. And as a researcher, we should be anticipating how we're going to try and minimize or avoid such types of harms. And the types of harms in here can include physical harm, it can include psychological harm, or include social disadvantage. So at this point, I'm going to ask you any questions you may, or any studies you may think of that could have some harm. And what would you do to minimize that harm?
Taking biological samples.
Taking biological samples, yeah. And blood. So how do you minimize that harm?
Minimizing number of participants. The volume of sample you take, and probably if your study dictates to go to a group which can give the blood depending on an age group, for instance, instead of concentrating on infants, suppose if you are slightly elderly children. I mean, that's the last one.
Okay. What else? What other studies could
Not exceeding the threshold number of participants.
reaching? Sorry.
We have threshold number of participants which are required. Few times people are taking for the avoiding SD standard deviation. People means experiments in the inclusion criteria is expanding to avoid the SD. That must be minimized.
Okay, so I think what I'm trying to understand from you is that if you reached something of significance,
Yeah,
if you
means the number of the sample size must be threshold level only, not exceeded.
okay, great. Any psychological harm? That's physical. What about psychological?
If an intervention targets the woman of the household, does that lead to intra-household disharmony or tensions, psychological harm or disharmony within intra-household relationships?
So what would you do? Because you still would need to research. Maybe there's some sensitive issues. How you as a researcher?
Again, formative research to try and preempt, to look at how the intervention might be implemented to start with. That would be key. Feasibility studies, pilot studies, formative research to try and just mitigate that risk as much as possible and look at other potential factors that may affect those issues.
Social disadvantage.
So sometimes some of the respondents get vulnerable because of some of the questions, and they may be afraid of providing information. So that is also kind of social disadvantage. Say, for example, if we are collecting information from the functionaries, government functionaries, and if you are getting information, there might be a fear that the supervisors may come to know about that and they may get affected by in terms of their administrative procedures, etc. So they need to be taken care of.
Great. Just thinking off the top of my head, and the rules we have in my country, we are very restrictive on genetic research and submitting samples for biobanking for genetic research. And the idea behind it is because they don't, they're trying to minimize or prevent any future discrimination that could result, or stigmatization that could result from, finding out that a certain population has this type of disease or problem. So, trying to prevent that kind of social disadvantage. And the psychological harm that I often think about and I often give as an example would be like if you want to study minority groups, for instance, or homosexuals in a context where men have sex with men in a context where it's prohibited, so there could be some kind of psychological disadvantages or harm, should I say, there from those kinds of studies. And the way in which you research, because this is important, that you could do it is to make sure that you recruit maybe without written informed consent. You use a kind of snowballing strategy in your study design where you get one person to be able to help you identify the next participant. Yes.
Yeah, I had a quick question about specifically the genetic testing. So this is kind of specific to this test called 23andMe, or this product called 23andMe, and wondering how social disadvantage manifests at different levels and how that's taken into account in these kinds of ethics reviews. For this 23andMe product, I'm thinking that on an individual level, the social disadvantage would be really high if some private health information was leaked for the individual participating in the study. However, at a population level, the social disadvantage could be that this particular group is underrepresented in different genetic research, and thus there's just not a high enough sample size to create really good estimates for these different genetic markers that predict health at population level. So I was wondering how different levels perhaps play a part in this.
Yeah, I think so. I don't know much about maybe Sylvia, do you know much about that? Yeah.
Or just at least around representation.
Okay. So if I get you right, maybe this is is this the test that a lot of people are doing in the States that you can
Yeah.
And you can get your family and get to know your background.
Right. I was thinking so when I was thinking about taking it, I was like, oh, it's going to provide me a lot of great information, but I found out the sample size for Asians is so small that it can't provide me anything really of use, and so that's just underrepresentation, and that's a social disadvantage that is largely due to my lack of inclusion in the space.
And so when you take this test, do you take it at home?
Yes.
Okay. And so the risk of the information becoming public, how does that manifest itself if you're taking it in the privacy of your home?
Well, I was thinking at an individual level, we think of social disadvantage for these genetic tests to be around loss of privacy, but I guess wondering how a larger social need for this kind of information plays a part in deciding where the benefits and the risks lay.
I mean, so to answer your question, Malawi might actually be losing out from participating in such kinds of valuable research. Like, we didn't participate in the H3N network, I think, because of our restrictive regulations. But we know that important information is going to and has come from PhD ended with on genomic research. So, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that's very interesting. I think in ethics, there's a philosophy of ethics that says that a single individual cannot be sacrificed for the sake of the community. So the protection of that individual is more important than whatever else you can do that will benefit the community. I think it goes a little bit along the lines of what you say, although there's so much ethic issues around this example you give. So as an individual, I risk that, my information is going to come out and someone will know that I have certain condition and I will never be employed again, so maybe I don't take it. But then, as an individual, you say maybe I have a responsibility to contribute to the pool of data from Asia because there's not a lot and actually that will benefit the community. Ultimately, that's an individual decision that is hard to draw even what is the right answer there. There's further and more important, I think, ethical issues with this type of data that is being generated, and to me, it's more who's benefiting from it. So that data that is being generated, you as an individual get your little description of your sort of genealogy or where you come from, but who owns that data ultimately, and for what purposes that is being used, is even a little bit beyond the power of the individual who provided that sample to decide that there's a little bit of consent you have to give, but you never know what is going to happen and what that data is going to be used for. And to me, that's what the real ethical dilemma with such procedure comes in. Is the benefit is the usage going to benefit all those that participated, even the larger communities? If more Asians participate, whatever is going to be done with those data will benefit the Asians or not. So to me, those ethical dilemmas in that process are at that high level. And I don't think anyone is actually dealing with it or doing anything about it, actually. But yeah, going back to the very original question in ethics, in theory, you shouldn't sacrifice an individual for the sake of the community. So.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So I think the most important feature here, going back to the lecture, is to talk about the concept of minimal risk. And I think that's the one thing that a researcher should seek as much as possible to achieve in order to avoid certain types of harms. Sometimes harms are not avoidable, but we've got to limit those. There's a description by the US Federal Common Rule that talks about how to, that describes risk. That's the probability and magnitude of harm or discomfort anticipated in the research is not greater in and of themselves than those ordinarily encountered in daily life. So, how does a researcher try and make a risk assessment, identify a risk, and interpret the risk to ensure that they are minimizing some of the risks? Risk assessments can be characterized in 4 different ways, but they are interrelated. The first thing a researcher must be able to do is identify the hazard. So we all would come in with a priori knowledge of the types of hazards an intervention could have if we're going to introduce it. And that would consist of discovering, and at least in the protocol in your study design as well, outlining what some of the adverse outcomes could be. And usually that is standard. As well as exposing the quantification. So determining how likely they are to occur. And I think that's really also an important thing that a reviewer likes to look at. Giving kind of probability. As well as the risk management and communication. Okay? So comprises of risk characterization and what should be done. So if you're aware of some of the risks, and if the risks are seeming great, then what are you as a researcher going to do to mitigate or make some assurances to your research participants that you're going to minimize this? In my country, and maybe in many other countries, so you have, like, for example, clinical trial insurance. And if it's a new intervention that's, say, in phase 3, then we would require that an investigator, for example, gets clinical trial insurance. And that insurance is a specific one that is classified as no fault, so that a vulnerable person who's enrolled in the study and has a really serious adverse outcome doesn't have to go to strenuous lengths to prove. Okay, so that was one way in which was to provide that a researcher provides assurance that they're going to manage the risk of participants, as well as to provide assurance to the ethics committee as well as to the participants. And then the other types of risk in research designs and studies, this involves sometimes when you're introducing 2 interventions, intervention A and intervention B. And sometimes with intervention A, there's no knowledge that exists on this particular drug, and that's why you're conducting this study. And it's at this point that the researcher is defined to have equipoise. Okay? So, in the community, clinical equipoise is defined as a state of uncertainty as to the relative superiority of the 2 treatments that are being introduced. And sometimes clinical equipoise is acceptable, particularly if we know we're going to generate new knowledge, and particularly if we know that the risk we are placing on participants will be at an acceptable level. And we provided the ethics committee assurance that the study design possibly will offer these 2 interventions, and maybe we'll have the standard of care. So you'll have intervention A and probably offer it with standard of care treatment. So if you're going to develop, for instance, a new malaria drug, and in your country there's already the standard of care for malaria, treating malaria, you would test that new intervention against the standard of care treatment. So even if you have that risk of exposure is acceptable, because you would have something to be able to treat the participants who have an adverse rapid decline from a non-response to the intervention that you're administering. As well as there's also been a debate in literature about how to use placebo-controlled trials and randomized controlled trials. And they would be acceptable and only allowed if there's valid reasons to use it, rather than using the active standard of care regimen. If you're going to use a placebo in your study, it must satisfy one of the conditions: that your study design already, or the intervention you are introducing, has no risk. And more than minimal risk, but a direct benefit from the placebo, and a more than minimal risk, but a minor increase over minimal risk, but the study is likely to reduce knowledge. Sorry, I'm going to rush through the a few more slides. So the 4th principle is obtain informed consent, and this is some of the practical stuff that you're going to do, but just to let you know that one of the key conditions would be when you are recruiting participants into research and they're taking part in the research, they should understand why they're taking part in the research. So very clear description and what the research requires of them, as well as outlining the possible discomforts that they will experience, understand that they are volunteers, and take part without being coerced or deceived, and provide participants the right to withdraw. If I had time, I would explain to you that sometimes deception in research can be acceptable. The last one for a researcher would be to consider the principle of research integrity and merit. Okay. So this approach asks a researcher to think about their research, their study design, and make sure that it's well justified. So it must be a potential benefit course in the form of new knowledge or improved well-being. And that the research meets relevant quality criteria and it's methodologically sound and ethically reviewed. And it's conducted, most importantly, by persons or teams with obviously essential experience and competence. And the last principle, which is justice, and I've disaggregated it into two areas. There's the procedural term. The procedural term of justice means that you can't do your research without having a research process, an ethics review process, because the ethics review process sets the standards and procedures for reviewing protocols and determining that the study can proceed, as well as applying justice through fairness and equity, particularly in the application of recruiting your participants in research. So ensuring that there's a fair process for recruitments in research and that there's no burden or unfair burden of participation on particular groups of people. And justice is also applied in research when we talk about the distribution of and access to benefits of participation. And I think I explained that earlier when I talked about SEONS and some of the guidance that SEONS provides about providing compensation for researchers in developing countries. So in sum, the principle of justice, it imposes or requires researchers to think about their obligations towards those who are vulnerable. So when we're talking about fairness, applying fairness and equity, we really are looking at protecting not just the not vulnerable, but particularly the vulnerable, because those are the ones that we traditionally target in research. Vulnerable, meaning class, economics, etc. So, conclusions and take-home messages. I think that if you're going to do research and you're going to do it well, doing research requires deliberate thought and consideration to do the right thing. And it requires putting people participating in research first, as well as understanding that the guidelines, the principles, the discourse on ethics is not set in stone. The ethical issues in research continue to evolve, and because of that evolution, we should be able to then think about how we adapt ourselves to still conduct research. Thank you. So what we're going to do now is, instead of taking the questions that you have, please bank them, write them down. We're going to get into some practical session with Sylvia, who's going to lead, and then thereafter we're going to do the question and answers.
Yes, so what we have thought is we'll have some time to work in a couple of case studies. Now, I'm aware of time and there's pretty much an hour left. And the more we break into groups and we're going to discuss, it can be quite lengthy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to present to you the two case studies and what the focus of each is. And then I'd like to gather whether you have interest on either, and we can create the groups. Or if you are all interested in one, then we can just work on that one to sort of make the exercise a bit shorter, perhaps. All right, so one of the case studies we wanted to work with you on is about informed consent. So to get us thinking through what are the elements of informed consent that are important and what are the best channels to convey and to go through the informed consent process with different types of communities. So the case study is inspired by a study that my organization did a number of years ago. We work on livestock and health. Back then we didn't work much on nutrition. But basically, there is this Maasai community in Kenya and East Africa. They are a very remote population. They are cattle herders. They have big cattle herds, are quite illiterate. They live in very rural settings, so very isolated and with very depth and well-preserved traditional cultures. So we went to work with them, and what we wanted to know is, we wanted to work with their animals and see which diseases the animals were having. So we wanted to collect some blood samples from the cattle, some milk samples from the cattle, then we would test them for several diseases. And we wanted to do an interview of the farmers to understand transmission pathways of those diseases to humans. We did it, this is the map of Tanzania. We did that in Tanzania. We work in two main areas. And what did we do? We do questionnaires to the people. We collected blood samples, as I said. So what we like to do on this exercise is consider in that setting, put yourself into that setting as researchers that are going to be doing such a project there. What are the elements of the informed consent you think are essential? What are the pieces of data that these people need to know to be able to appropriately inform, decide if they want to be part of it or not? Okay? And then also, what are the mechanisms to convey that information, given this context? Then I will give you a brief form that we developed, and I would like you to critically review what is missing there. And then we can, after that, we can have a discussion around, what will be the best way of conveying that message. So that's one case study. The second one is, again, a study that was done in a study in Kenya. This came to our board to be reviewed. But what they wanted to do is they wanted to work with especially women that are traditional healers. So women that in East Africa are considered witchcraft. So they use traditional medicine, traditional herbs to cure medical conditions. It's illegal. That practice is illegal in the country where they were doing the research. And it can be very sensitive. So they wanted to go look for these people, do interviews with them, focus group discussions, understanding which practices they have. Do they treat people? Do they treat animals? Both? Who they don't train? How do they pass on the information to understand all that? So that was the title of the study. So, and then on top of that, they wanted to also take photographs, do an exhibition to promote this sort of way of medicine, alternative medicine, in the country. So we have a little proposal, a summary of the proposal that I'd like you to browse through quickly, and then identify what are the 3 key issues in terms of ethics that you, as an ethics board, you will advise the researchers to go back and think properly through. Just 3, there's a number of them, perhaps just 3. So now, who wants to work on informed consent? Who wants to work? Yeah, 3, informed consent, informed consent, informed consent.
I'll work with you.
Who wants to work on the other one, on the ethics of a proposal, like the study design and the ethical implications? All the rest. Fantastic. Wow, that is going to be tough. Okay, No, I don't know. Well, maybe some people really want to do the informed consent one, so it would be good to have that one. So can I have a smaller group, maybe, if possible, 6 people, if someone from the other side can join the informed consent group. Maybe the informed consent group can stay here, so you can stay here and people can join you. You can join and all the others maybe into groups. You can work into groups. And then we'll have 20 minutes or so, 25 minutes of discussion, and then we share with everyone. I hope that at the very end we'll have a few minutes for you to raise any comments you might have from your own work. Okay? All right. So this is a simplified copy. Maybe you shouldn't actually look at it yet. Start by listing perhaps those elements that one should consider when developing the focus process, and then you review what I've given you, which is also a simplified one.
take the test? Altogether didn't take the test. He didn't take it.
Oh, because he's still actually well, that's
See that?
it's also expensive.
So anyway, the question was, what did you want to find?
So, okay, so can we ask the team one, case study one, to tell us the Maasai and your informed consent process? What did you work out? You know, what is it the key essential aspect that you're gonna work through?
So we reviewed the informed consent form that was presented to the Maasai livestock owners. We thought there were a few things missing. Most important, we were really interested in how animal welfare or social disadvantage regarding their livestock ownership was not considered in the informed consent. So, for example, these livestock are intertwined with their culture, how they're perceived within society, and so considerations for those factors needed to be presented clearly for the risks and benefits of participating in the study. We also thought there was a lack of research purpose presented to the participants, so it wasn't clear why the study was being done, what the rationale for the study was. That information needed to be presented for the participants to make a clear decision on it. And last round, just animal ethics reviews. We were wondering, so this might have gone through like a social behavioral ethics review, but since it does involve working with animals, if it needs to go through the equivalent ethics review for animal welfare.
Right, to answer that, yes, indeed, there is a board that reviews animal use in welfare. So we have to outline how we are gonna sample these animals, what practices we are gonna do on them. So as if you were doing it with humans, but just with animals, there is a board that reviews that, and you have to follow certain procedures. So some of the things you said is. We'll have to explain them what we are doing to their animals effectively, because these animals are very precious to them. So yes, indeed, on the final form, we did have a section that explained we are going to restrain your animals like this is going to take this long, it's going to be done by experts, and your animal shouldn't drop dead, but if it does, this is what we will do. So yeah, exactly, that is a key aspect of research. And I mean, it applies to agriculture and health and nutrition. You know, whatever process you are going to go through, it has to be explained. How long the questionnaire is going to take. Often we forget about that. Is it 3 hours? Is 1 hour? Is half an hour? That is very important. And you know, are we sample? If we're going to sample, is it going to be painful or not? How are you going to handle your child? So that is key. Also the purpose of the research. What is the rationale for this, and do you think this is important enough for you to participate? Something you didn't comment on with the format. Will this format be suitable for? Is that format suitable for those communities? You think? Yeah.
We discussed it.
Okay.
We forgot to mention it.
And what did you say? Yeah. What was the outcome of the discussions?
No, because
Please join, yeah. So we discussed a couple of things with respect to this being an animal study on cattle and Masai. And that is also, first we did discuss that actually the paper format might not be used as well. And there were some interesting ideas of how to use pictures instead to explain what was explained here. And apparently there is an app called Speaking Book, which they're trying in South Africa. And also more.
we're going to show you.
Yeah. Yeah, so where they can you can actually listen to it on the phone or something, take your time to digest the information as opposed to quickly reading this out and sign that was thing. And we talked about also, we felt that all the elements, even if they're there's something about Maasai and the intertwining of animals beyond so that somehow that nuance is lacking. We couldn't figure out what that is or how to bring it, but thinking it's like a child. It is like, I mean, when you said the animal is dropped dead, I was like, I'm saying, we'll take this blood, but if your child dies, then, we can send you a free ambulance. It's not like, it's something like that. So something around that nuance is, I don't know what it is and what you guys have done, but it would be quite interesting.
No, I mean, we have the full final form, but it explains a bit around that. But yes, indeed, you have to consider what does this represent for these communities. And obviously, we didn't say relevant drop deads, but I mean, this is something they want to know about compensation. Yes. No, sure. No, but I mean, because it's exactly that. You have to really understand how these people relate to these animals, and even collecting a milk sample and the blood sample. What does that blood milk mean for them? So you have to really justify why this is important and what you're going to do with that blood and what is going to happen after you finish your analysis. Because for them, a piece of blood is really a piece of the animal, almost the soul. So all that needs to be captured. In terms of the format, we indeed developed 2 other formats, which is with photos. So we explained the whole process with 6 photos. We have big posters that we were taking during our informed consent that they could understand. And also another one with pictures. So the same, but it was cartoons. Because different communities relate differently to photos and to pictures and to drawings and to words. So we actually did a very little pilot to understand which one they would prefer, and they did prefer this one. This was more understandable for them. So we used this one throughout the entire study then to explain the phases of the study, what we are going to be doing with it. So I think this shows this is the time we have to take to develop informed consent. You really need to think it's not as simple as writing down a list of things to say. You not only have to train your enumerators to do it appropriately, but you really need to think what is the best format for these people to internalize. And we touch on informed consent of this study we have here, and how really thinking through how we are going to explain every single element of it is essential. So now we move to them, and they can tell us what 3 main issues they found on this proposal that they think the researchers would think more about.
So in the given case study, women as custodian of traditional medicine in Africa. So the research questions were very critical to, and the group whom we were interviewing is basically vulnerable group, and the data collection type was also very different. There are 5 methods: FZT, participants observation, then oral histories and in-depth interviews, photography, and paintings. So these all were very critical. So the group has discussed about that and what should be the consent, and should be formal consent, written or verbal. So 3 major points which were drawn. First was important was the confidentiality. It's very important, that should be explained in detail. Second thing was that what are the risks and benefits because of the vulnerability. This is very important, and because lots of questions which were asked might be the critical for them. So they should be fully aware about that, and there should be written consent form. Even if someone is giving verbal, then obviously there should be someone should witness that. So, and third important thing which was taken that understanding the social and psychological harm as well, because due to kind of practices which is getting there. So this will be also very important to understand the social and psychological concerns.
So we felt that that wasn't particularly well explained in the proposal. Couple of main issues about that study. Basically, what they want to do is they want to follow up this group of mostly women but also men that do traditional healing, live with them for a period of time, understand and take records and images and pictures of the practices. They plan to do the same, like interviews, focus group discussions with them. They plan to take photographies, do paintings, portraits, and do an exhibition to promote this sort of type of medicine, alternative medicine, in both in the African country but also abroad. So yeah, some of the key issues that were not well captured in the proposal or were thought through by the researchers were to what extent this photography is part of the research, and how much it is required, and the paintings, the portraits, the exhibitions, to achieve the study objectives. Because it's all very nice and beautiful to take pictures and then eventually commercialize and publicize, but we thought that that was a very critical sensitivity point for the type of people we were dealing with. How to protect them from potentially being exposed and getting to be wrong. Stigma in the community because of what they do. Now the researchers often say, well, we get informed consent. So if they agree, then it's fine. But then it becomes critical how we do our informed consent, so that they know exactly what it means to be on a picture in London, or to be on an exhibition in Nairobi or in South Africa, and you know, what are the potential harms of that, and the social harms primarily, because they might not even understand it at the first glance. So how researchers should actually very carefully think of those harms and benefits for those people. Maybe there are benefits of that. Maybe they can be promoted. That's fine. But what are the risks that they go against? Yeah, and we talked about they were planning to do collective consent for the focus group discussions. We discussed the slide here about that, how appropriate it is. And I guess our conclusion was that collective consent is not the standard, but it could be done. But the critical point is whether collective consent may coerce people to participate in a study. So whenever we are dealing with a topic of research that may be a bit sensitive again, and there is a risk of participants feeling the pressure to participate or not to participate because of the group they are, in those cases collective consent shouldn't be approved. So again, I guess the message is, when it comes to ethics and assessing the appropriateness of proposals and protocols, it all comes down to what it is done for, what alternatives exist, what are the risks for participants of going through this process. So a little bit, there's no, as I was talking to the Senate before the meeting, there's no really prescriptive rules to follow. Or there are some standards and procedures to follow, but all of them can be revised according to the needs of the project, but always with the main aim of protecting the rights and do no harm to the participants and the communities. So I think that summarizes some of the topics we wanted to talk about. It's already 5:30, I believe, so we don't have much time left, Lucinda.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It's on the app. The video is on the app.
Exactly. We'll show you, there is an interesting video that indeed shows other ways of collecting informed consent, again, on our literate communities. We're going to just display perhaps the URL so that you can look for it if you want to.
On this conference app.
Also, this is also in the conference app.
It's 4 minutes.
4 or 5 minutes, yeah. And I guess Lucinda agrees, there was very limited time for all the things that we could discuss about ethics. I think it is a world by itself. And I think as we move more into being more sensitized around ethics, more questions come to our minds as we develop projects. So what I will encourage you is when we do provide feedback on the session to the organizers, to clearly say what was missing. And would there be value of having an extended session? And if so, what are the key issues you think we should be discussing as a community when it comes to research ethics? This was a bit of an introduction. It's the first time this topic is covered in the conference. So your feedback would be very valuable for us to consider next year. Should we expand this? Is it valuable or not? And if we expand it, really, what should be the topic of discussion? So if you can do that, that would really be helpful.
And also, if you have any questions during the week and you bump into us, I think please feel free to ask those questions and we can problematize and try and solve them together.
Exactly. So I think that brings us to the end of it. Unless you have any burning questions or comments you'd like to make around the topic.
I want to have one question. So for most of our research proposals, we need to take the approval from the institutional review board. Now the question is that research approvals from them. But what is the ideal method where this IRB should be registered? In, say for example, in India, I think there is no appropriate government body or any other body where the IRB should be registered. What happens is most of the IRBs, they get their registration at Office of Human Resource Protection in USA. So, what is the appropriate board where we should go for protection? In most of our development organizations, research organizations, there are 4 or 5 people who make their group that this is the research committee. Is that right to take the approval from that committee?
Lucinda, you want to comment? Or?
Yeah, I find that quite interesting. I think in the context that you and I work in, I don't know about in Europe or the UK, but I think that there are registered boards established, like in my country, through an act. So there's a national, what we call the National Commission for Science and Technology, and it's this body that is established through an act to oversee research governance in Malawi. And it's the same body that provides the accreditation for the IRB's existence within our country. And so even if we have that and we're legally recognized and our approval is legally recognized within our country, even if we have recognition from Office of Protection, that doesn't matter. We still need to be legally recognized.
So in, say for example, in our country here, some of the ministries or for health, Indian Council of Medical Research, they have a committee, but it is so time taking that I think they take years many times. Okay, so it is next to impossible for a smaller organization to get a permission from them, and as a result, I think 99% of the researchers don't take approvals from them. Okay, now what is the options in such a case? So some of the organizations whose research boards are registered in OHRP USA, they take approval from them. But there are many other organizations who have their own IRB which are not registered anywhere, they also provide approvals. So is it right?
Indeed. I think you wanted to
I was referring to ICMR only.
Yes.
At the national level, that's the only body.
But that's only for health and ICMR also. Man, you might be knowing, getting approval from ICMR is very difficult.
Yeah, that of course is another issue. But then we have the Animal Ethics Committee, we have the CPCA, which gives you the animal, that's the board which gives all the approvals. The CPCA, Center for Protection of Animals. So you have an institutional animal ethics or institutional human ethics committee at the institutional level, wherever you're working. You have to set it up with experts drawn from various fields. And then you apply to the board for your registration number. So I believe that is the process. But then at the national level, we have only the ICU.
So I think, I think ideally all of that will be regulated at the country level. Also because no matter that an ethics committee in the US can grant approval and think this is very solid, I think the perspective from the people who understand the local context is essential, especially the regulatory bodies. So I think ideally every country should have their processes and the way of accrediting ethics boards, because the workload is enormous. So you cannot rely on one institution, otherwise they take years to respond. So I think the idea of having institutional boards is important if they are regulated somehow. So they obey to certain accreditation through central government. The case of Africa is that countries are getting there, you see. So while in human medicine, the story of ethics goes far back, so the processes are very advanced. When it comes to agriculture and agriculture for nutrition and health, we are a bit behind. But I think countries are trying to catch up and put up procedures. So having your own internal ethics board, I think is a good way of starting. And again, how functional that board is, how well they can pick up on ethics, that requires capacity. The board, what I'm chairing, it started in my organization as a voluntary board. So people could actually submit, as we were developing our methods, our protocols, understanding what is this ethics all about. It was a few years of voluntary, just could apply or not. And then we became registered, and then we actually became official, even for the country. So, I mean, your question is very important. Where do you apply to and how valid that is? Validity legally, they have to be accredited by the government. Validity ethically, actually, there's a bit of a different context. And I guess it's all of our responsibility to actually bring this dialogue up to those doing research and getting engaged on those boards so that actually research ethics is taken seriously. So there's no good answer, but I mean, over the years, those things will improve. And I encourage you all to engage on the processes in your institutions in your countries, because you have sensitivity for ethics. That's why you are here.
And it is really time consuming in any country. University of Sydney, we do a lot of work in Bangladesh, so we work with ICBDMB, sometimes BRAC, and their ethics process has to be met first and foremost, and then we have to go through the whole University of Sydney ethics process as well, which, factor in a year. Sometimes it just goes back and forth, but it's very stringent and it does satisfy that we have to go through both. So that's what the clinical trials. Let's take a lot.
Okay, well, thanks for your participation and see you around.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.